All right, let's talk a little bit about lots on the lake. You know, obviously with over 100 communities here on Lake Keowee, typically you're going to have a pretty good bit of inventory available for sale on waterfront lots. So different things that we need to think about on waterfront lots. When I first start talking to someone about, lots and buying a waterfront lot instead of maybe buying a home, first thing we talk about is we talk about our budget, because our budget typically is going to dictate what kind of property that you're going to be looking for on Lake Keowee. Now, let's talk about, the different, what I call the three basic different types of lots on the lake. Number one is you have a cove view property. A cove view property means that you're in a cove, and the cove might be 20 yards wide, it might be 75 yards wide, but typically in a cove type property, you're going to be looking across the cove at another home and other docks that are along the shoreline. So that's what I call cove properties, and typically those cove properties tend to be the least expensive properties on the lake as far as waterfront. So we look for water depth in those coves, and really if you've got a nice deep cove property, that's not a bad thing, because you're protected off the main channel. You don't get as much boat traffic coming off the main channel, so you kind of have your own little swimming hole when you're right there in a deep water private protective cove. Second type of lot that we would be thinking about is what I call bay view property. Now, bay view property would be a lot that is not in a cove, it's not on open water, but it gives you maybe 200-300 yards, 200 yards looking across the bay, and maybe a little bit of open water out to the left or so, or to the right. That's what I call a bay view property. So a step up from a cove would be a bay view property here on Lake Keowee. And obviously as we step up in width of the cove, view in the cove, obviously we're going to be stepping up in price also. So our next lot that we would consider would be more of an open water view. Open water view might be a mile looking across the lake, it could be 5 or 6 miles looking across the lake. Typically those type properties tend to draw almost the highest type cost as far as what it's going to cost you, the buyer, to look at properties here on Lake Keowee. And then I throw in there what I call mountain view properties also, where you've got not only a lake view, you're on the water, have a lake view, you also have a mountain view property. So to get a lake property and a mountain view property, typically on average, that's going to be about the most expensive property you could buy on the lake. And in some situations there are properties here on the lake that are surrounded by water, almost little islands like little points. Those are always very, very costly. Okay, so let's just kind of recap. Cove properties tend to be in tighter coves looking across at other homes, tend to be least expensive. Then you have your bay view properties that would be next, open up, might have 100, 200 yards, kind of big old bay view, something like that, and maybe some open water views out to one angle when you're looking out. Then you have open water views, and then you have open water views with mountain views. And then again, some couples that I work with now that might have young children, they say, hey, we want more of a protective cove. My kids can get out and kayak, swim, just lay in the inner tube or float with their life jackets on. Typically, I'd probably be looking for something, maybe a cove or a bay view for them. Sometimes you get couples that just say, hey, we're going for the wow factor. Obviously, they're going to be looking for the open water, the mountain view properties. So that's what I'd be looking for. And it all depends, and we all talk about this, and we work our way through it, and I really listen to what you're trying to tell me and comprehend exactly what you're going to be looking for, because that's the key with me, is really getting to know you and getting to know what you're looking for, whether it's going to be a home or a lot itself. And of course, there's so many different characteristics in a piece of property other than view. You've got slope, flat lots, medium lots, steep lots. You've got exposure, north, south, east, or west. What type of trees? Some properties have more hardwoods. Some have a mix. Some, a few, have more pines. So all that's just going to dictate what kind of property that ultimately that we were going to wind up looking for once that we are out at the lake, and what properties that we'll wind up viewing. And typically after about, on average, it takes me about 3 lots after our initial phone conversation and talking and getting to know each other. After about 3 lots being out on a property, I pretty much got a bullseye on what I've got to find you in order to be able to help you find that right property here on Lake Keowee. Okay, so it kind of gives you a brief overview talking about lots on the lake, costs, what type they are, what kind of views, things like that. Okay, as always, call me with any questions. Be more than happy to talk to you and kind of figure out what direction we want to go if we want to consider a lot here on Lake Keowee.